OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're making a beautiful, oversized bag that is very beginner friendly. Today, we're gonna make the Aurora bag, and this bag comes to us from Sallie Tomato Patterns. Like I said, this is an oversized bag. It is nice and big, but it is very, very simple. It's pretty much just a very large boxy bag with a front panel, a back panel, a base, and then a lining. You have a couple of handles on the top, and then you do have an optional crossbody strap. On the top of the bag here, we have a nice long zipper with a fun tassel. And you can see when we open it up, inside a huge opening, and then we also have a slip pocket on one side of the lining. Now, the materials I used for this, except for the crossbody strap, the materials for everything else are in this month's, August, September OklaRoots Sallie Tomato monthly mystery box. This is the mystery item for August. So I love this bag so much. I think it is a great size for teachers going back to school, overnight trips. It's a very, very large bag, so you can put a lot in it, but I always want to warn you, don't put a lot of heavy stuff in it. Don't fill it with gallons and gallons of water. It's not made for that. But it's a great bag to put a lot of items, especially bigger items that are more lightweight. So again, that's why I think of teachers, because they're always taking all those supplies for school and stuff like that. And then also overnight bag, pajamas, blankets, stuffy, things like that. But the material for this is so fun. It kind of gives me a fall-ish feel. We've got these fun little bugs on there, which I think are so cute. So if you have the kit for this month, I just want to let you know you have everything here except for the webbing. The crossbody strap is an optional addition, so it's not included in the kit, as are the rivets. The rivets are just my own addition. The rivets are not in the kit. However, the hardware for the crossbody strap is in the kit. That got snuck in there. So if you want to make this with a crossbody strap, you can. It is optional. You do not have to have a crossbody strap on this at all. But if you want to get your own webbing and have an interchangeable strap, you can do that. You have the hardware for it. Okay, so this version here is made with all quilt cotton for the exterior, quilt cotton for the lining, and then cork for the base, cork for the handle, webbing for the crossbody strap. I wanted to show you another version I made to test out the pattern. It's good. I want to show you can make this with a lot of different material. So this one here is made with Theratex, which is from Fabric Therapy. I'll have a link down below for it. Theratex has a very soft feel to it. It has a bit of a thicker feel, but not like a vinyl. So it almost feels like it already has a good amount of interfacing on it, but it's still very drapey. It's also, can you hear that? Like a nylon. So it's very easy to keep clean, very easy to wipe down. I love this material so much. So for this one, I used that beautiful Theratex, and then on the bottom, I used some vinyl from Fabric Therapy as well, which has like a iridescent look to it. I also added purse feet on this one, which is optional. I'll tell you where to put them in the pattern during the tutorial if you'd like. And then I had a little bit extra fun with this one where I did some like EPP applique on there, which this is such a good bag for something like that. If you have an embroidery pattern, or you want to applique something, or a design, or if you have material and fabric markers, say this is for a teacher, and you want your kids to just decorate the bag first and then you sew it up. This is so big that it's perfect for something like that. So thank you so much to Sallie Tomato for allowing me to use your pattern on my channel. Thank you again to Sallie Tomato for sponsoring today's video. I love this monthly subscription box. The Sallie Tomato subscription box is really made for beginners. We try very hard to pick materials, to pick patterns that are easy enough for beginners to be able to follow along with. But if you're more intermediate, maybe you're just more adventurous and you want to kind of zhuzh it up with more crisp materials, maybe thicker things, then you can do that. You want to add your own thing, maybe add some zipper pockets on the inside, you can definitely do that. So it's a pattern that can be very basic or a lot more involved depending on how you feel when you're making it. So if you're interested in looking into the Sallie Tomato monthly box, I will have a link down in the description of this video. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shout outs, leave them down in the comment section. You guys, Sallie Tomato comes out with new patterns like every month, or like twice every month. There are so many new patterns. So if there's any pattern you want to see on the channel, just let me know. Put it down in the comment section. You know what, I just thought this bag would look so good if it was quilted. Wouldn't it? Oh, then you have kind of like a Vera Bradley looking bag. If you quilted this, you don't have to do like a heavy quilt. You could do just like a loose line, swirly whirly quilting on this. Perfect. There's just so many things you could do with this bag. I love it. I just love all the options. All right, guys, let's get started. All right, from your main fabric, you're gonna need about a half of a yard of material. So I'm gonna show you the pattern pieces as we go through the material requirements. So from your main material, you're going to have 2 large cuts of material, and you're gonna need about a half a yard for this. Now this can be quilt cotton, this can be faux leather, this can be vinyl, this can be cork, this can be any number of materials. Whatever material you choose depends on what kind of interfacing you're gonna need. If you have a thicker material, you don't need to add any interfacing. I used that Theratex on the other bag when I was practicing, and I didn't add any interfacing to it. Since this is a very light quilt cotton, I am going to be adding the fleece to this. If you have the kit, you'll also be doing that. The kit does not have a fusible fleece. It is a sew-on fleece. So if you want to quilt that ahead of time, just like some nice big thick lines, go ahead and do that. If you have a fusible fleece, you can fuse it on. If you want to do a really heavy, dense quilting, I do suggest that you cut these pattern pieces about 1 inch wider and 1 inch taller, and then quilt it onto your fleece and then trim it down to the pattern suggestion, because sometimes quilting does make the material shrink a little bit. But either way, you're going to need 2 cuts of that. I don't have any woven interfacing I'm using today. I do always recommend that you add woven interfacing if you're worried about your bag being a little too floppy. So if you want to beef this up a bit, just add a layer of woven interfacing to each of these panels first. Next, we have our contrast material, and this needs to be some sort of a heavier material. So faux leather, cork, something like that, some sort of vinyl. Something that's okay having raw edges, because we will be using it for the handle, and the handle will have raw edges. So I suggest one like 12-inch roll or something like that of material, if that's how you buy it. 12, 18-inch wide roll, a full roll of material. So from this though, we're gonna make our straps. So we have 2 cuts for our straps. These are just the regular handle straps. We have 1 cut for the base of the bag. We have some extra material here for a tassel if you feel like doing that. We have a small cut for the zipper tab, and then I have a couple extra cuts here. These are both 3 inches by 3 inches, okay? These are 2 3-inch by 3-inch cuts. I'll be using this to show you how to build a little D-ring holder on the sides of the bag. Now, like I said in the beginning, if you got the kit for this month, the crossbody strap is considered optional, and the webbing for the strap is not included. But I am gonna show you how to attach the D-rings if you want to. If you don't wanna have a crossbody strap, you only wanna use handles, go ahead and just put these to the side. You don't need to cut these out at all, just use this. All right, now from your lining, a quilt cotton is great, cotton woven material is great. You can use a water resistant canvas, something lightweight. You don't have to add interfacing to this if you don't want to. I know some of us just like to add woven interfacing to all woven material. That's totally up to you. But you will need about 3/4 of a yard of material for your lining. And from the lining, we have these cuts. We have the base cut. We have 2 rectangles here that are for the zip pocket on the inside. We have 2 rectangle cuts here, which are for the slip pocket on the inside of the bag. And then we have 2 large cuts, and these are just the main panels for the lining. Next up, we have some fleece batting. Now you can use fusible fleece, you can use quilting, batting, you can use whatever you want. I wouldn't suggest like a Decoville Light or anything like that, because I feel like that would be way too stiff. This is supposed to be kind of a slouchy bag. But you want something to beef it up. If you're using a thicker material, you don't need to add any of the fleece if you don't want to. It's totally optional. So again, with fleece, you can quilt, you can do lots of stuff with this. But I just have 2 big cuts of fleece. You're gonna need about 2/3 of a yard of this material. I have these cut so that they are larger than my exterior pieces, so that way when I attach them, I can just kind of spray baste it, attach it easily, no big deal. I don't have these cut to size yet. And finally, you're gonna need a small cut of heavy stabilizer, about 1/8 of a yard. This is just going to be for the base of the bag. If you're adding purse feet, this is going to be really helpful for that. Otherwise, it's just nice structure so that the whole bag isn't loosey-goosey. We do like a kind of a smushy bag, but the base we want to be nice and firm. Okay, so let's talk about the hardware. If you have the kit, you have this over here. This hardware over here on the right is considered optional. You're going to have a zipper. This is a number 5 zipper, and it needs to be at least 24 inches long. And then we have the hardware kit. Now again, the hardware kit really goes with a crossbody strap, and since for the kit this month, we weren't planning on doing crossbody strap, this is pretty much just like bonus hardware. So from this, you're gonna have 2 1.5-inch wide D-rings, a 1.5-inch wide slider, and 2 1.5-inch swivel hooks, which again is all for a crossbody strap. I'm going to be showing you how to do the crossbody strap, even though we don't have all the stuff in the kit this month to do it. But I wanna show you how to do it. So you can use the webbing, or you can use your cork to make the connectors for the D-rings. I'm gonna be using the cork. That's what those extra cuts were for. And then over here I have some 1.5-inch wide webbing. You're gonna need about 48 to 56 inches of webbing, depending on how long you like your strap. And then again, optional, not necessary, but I love the way it looks. I have 8 sets of rivets over here. Okay, so here's pretty much all the other stuff. I like to have lots of marking tools because I never know what I'm going to be working with. I have an air erasing marking tool, a chalk marking tool, and a silver ink pen. Which one of those I use depends on the material I'm using it on and where on the material I'm using it on. And then I have my stiletto, which is like my third hand at the sewing machine, and a seam ripper, because no one's perfect. A lighter to help clean up any little loose threads. I have some washi tape. This is Sallie tomato washi tape. This is just to help hold down pieces before I can move them over to sew them. Some Beacon 3-in-1 glue, a 1" by 6" ruler. The top thread, the thread that's going through my needle, is a Tex 45 weight thread. A Tex 35 weight thread is also very good for domestic machines. This does work on my Bernina, however, not in the bobbin, only on the top thread. In the bobbin, I like to use a Gutermann thread. This is more lightweight, but it is still a polyester thread, which is important, and it works great in my bobbin. My needle of choice is a Microtex 8012. I have a hole punch over here, and this is going to go for the rivets. So if you're not using rivets, you don't need to worry about the hole punch or the rivet press, but I have both of those here, as well as the die set to go with my rivets, and then a large amount of clover clips. I knew I was going to forget to show you something. Also, this is the 505 adhesive spray. This is what I'm going to use to put my fleece with my quilt cotton before I baste it down. This just helps prevent the material from shifting while I'm sewing it. If you have a fusible fleece, you don't need this. Okay, so let's get our exterior material attached to our fleece. So I have my fleece cut and I have my exterior material, and I want to make sure my exterior material is right side up and the wrong side is against the fleece. Again, if you have fusible fleece, just fuse it on. You can see my fleece cut is a good amount larger than my quilt cotton cut. So I'm going to kind of treat this the way I do with quilts when I'm basting a quilt. So I'm just going to lift up half of my quilt cotton, shake up my sticky stuff, give it a little spray, just like that. And then I gently push this, and then I start from the middle and just very gently push this down, just like that. There we go. I'm gonna let that sit while I pull up the other side, and you can tell when you get to your gluey side because it starts to stick. And we'll just spray over here now. And then once again, I just kind of lift this up and start pressing from the middle, nice and gently. I'm not stretching anything, I'm not yanking on the fabric or anything like that. I want it to be nice and just relaxed, because I would recommend adding some woven interfacing to this quilt cotton if you're worried about any of that. It will just help keep it more sturdy. And if you're quilting it, I would still recommend using a woven interfacing on the quilt cotton, but it's not required. Okay, so I'm going to do the same with the other exterior panel. All right, once you have both of these sprayed on and held together, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to baste them on at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, once you have these basted on, not only do you obviously want to trim down the excess fusible fleece, but you also want to trim it out of the seam. Now, this can be personal preference. If you're worried about your sewing machine not being able to handle thicker seams, then you definitely just can lift up your material like this and carefully trim down the fusible fleece so that it's closer to the stitching, and that will just help keep the bulk of the fusible fleece out of the seam. Now, if you're comfortable working with vinyl and faux leather and cork, kind of layers of it, then you don't have to worry so much about trimming this out of the seam, especially if it's just this fleece from the kit, because it is pretty lightweight. It's not like a really dense fleece, but I am going to just carefully lift up the edge of the fabric and trim the fleece so that it's closer to the stitching. So I'm going to do this for all 4 edges of both of these exterior panels. All right, once you have these trimmed down, now let's mark the midpoint on the top and bottom edges of each of these. So the top and bottom edges are the longer edges. If you have anything you want to add to this, like applique, or have the kids grab some paint pens and paint this, these panels are not going to lose any of their bottom. I mean, for boxing, we have a separate panel for the base. So you can really let the kids go to town. You can have lots of fun with this. I did a little bit of EPP top stitching on here on my other bag, which is really cool. But for this one, I'm going to leave it as is, but I am going to add one of my bag tags. So I'm going to pick one of these panels, and using the center midpoint mark on the bottom edge, I'm going to measure up 1.5 inches and center my bag tag just like that. And if you want to use double-sided tape, go ahead and grab some of that to help with this. And now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along all 4 edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your exterior panels prepped the way you want them, go ahead and set them to the side. Now let's work on our straps. Grab both of your straps and some clips. And if you want to use double-sided tape here for this, you can do that as well. Otherwise, you can just use the clips. And we're going to fold these wrong sides together, long sides together, just directly in half, just like this. So just add clips along the entire length of the raw edges. So now let's take these to the sewing machine. We're going to top stitch along both long edges, the raw edge and the folded edge, each at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once you have these tops stitched, if you have like what I have over here, like these little fuzzies on the side, you want to trim those down, but you can also use a lighter carefully. Now, if you have a light colored material, it is possible that you'll have these little black sooty stains, which can come off with rubbing alcohol, but darker fabric is a little bit easier. We can just kind of gently go down with a lighter, and that's just going to tuck in those little fuzz bits. All right, if you want to round these little corners of your straps or make little angles, you can go ahead and do that. I tried to do little like arrows on my last straps and it wasn't great, so I'm just gonna leave them as is. Just this is fine. So now grab one of your main exterior panels and lay it right side up. Now from the top edge, mark down 1 inch and draw a horizontal line, and then mark down 3 inches and draw a horizontal line. So we have 2 horizontal lines, 1 inch down and 3 inches down. And then from that midpoint line, go to the left 3.5 inches and mark a vertical line. And then from that midpoint line, go to the right 3.5 inches and mark a vertical line. This needs to be done with some sort of a chalk marker, air erasing marker, something that's not going to stay there. Now grab your strap and lay your strap right side up. And you're going to take one end of your strap and you're going to line it up with the vertical line on the left. So it's going to go to the left of that vertical line, just like this. And I'm going to grab some washi tape to hold this in place. The bottom edge of your strap should line up with the bottom 3-inch horizontal line. And the nice thing about these marks is if your tape doesn't hold and things move around, that's okay. You can always readjust at the sewing machine. So I'm going to use clips along the top here to hold it, just like that. Now keep your strap nice and straight as you twist it around and bring it to the other side. So this is going to go to the right of the right vertical line. Bottom raw edge is going to line up with the bottom 3-inch horizontal line. And we're going to just use some clips and some tape to hold this together. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch over the top stitching on the long edges of our strap. And then we're going to top stitch right along the bottom edge here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you might want to get a marking tool. So I have my chalk marking tool here and I still see this 1-inch horizontal line on my exterior material. I'm going to use that to help me mark a horizontal line on my strap. And that just lets me know that's where I'm going to be sewing. So that was the whole reason for that 1-inch mark, is just to show you where you're going to be sewing on your strap and to keep everything straight. So I'm going to go top stitch little rectangles on each one of these straps. And there we go. We have it stitched on. Now, if you want to add rivets to this, you can. I did not include rivets on these in my original rivet count. The other rivets are for other strap things. But I think I will actually add a couple of rivets to this. So you can add 2 rivets. You can add 1 rivet. I think I'm just going to add 1 rivet on each side. So instead of 8 rivets, you would need 9, 10, 11, 12. You need 12 rivets. But we can add a couple of cute rivets here. I think I'm going to have my rivet. I don't know if I want it centered or more on the bottom. More on the top. See, 2 rivets would be good here because it is such a big rectangle, but I think instead I am just going to center it. So I'm just going to center it right in the center like that. Grab my hole punch and just punch a hole out. You could also sew crisscrosses, like an X in each of these to help. The point of all this extra rivets, extra sewing, is to make sure that this handle is secure in place, because when you load this thing up with heavy stuff, you don't want this ripping off the bag. So rivets help. Adding some sort of a sewing design in the center of this rectangle, just all that helps reinforce these handles. So once I have the holes punched, I can just take my rivet and pop it in. And then I'll just grab my little rivet press and press these down. And there we go. That's how you add a top handle. I love these colors. These colors are so pretty, aren't they? Perfect for fall. Go ahead and repeat this with your remaining handle and your other main exterior panel. So now let's work on the lining slip pocket. Take both of your lining slip pocket cuts and lay them right sides together, lining up all 4 edges. And grab some clips and clip them together. Okay, once you have these all clipped, make sure you mark a little 4-inch opening on the bottom edge, so it'll be one of the longer edges. On the bottom edge here, just mark a 4-inch opening. This will be how we turn the pocket out. So starting at one of those marks, we're going to stitch at a 1/4-inch seam allowance along all 4 edges and then stopping at the other marks so that we don't sew in between these 2 marks. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have these sewn, grab some scissors and let's just trim down the seam in the corners. So we're not cutting any stitching, we're just cutting the material, and that's just going to help us poke out those corners. Gives it a nicer finish. And now gently open up that opening you left and turn your material right side out. And now use your turning tool of choice. I have these cute little pink ones here. This just helps poke out corners. So I'm actually going to use the more square end of this instead of the pokey end. And I'm just going to tuck this in here and gently push out the corners of my material. I'm going to do this for all 4 corners. Alright, now we're going to want to iron this just to get it nice and flat. So I like to just roll out these seams a little bit. And you can put your hand inside the opening if you prefer. However it's easiest for you to get these seams nice and straight. So I do one at a time. So there's one edge there, and then I'll grab my iron, and I'm just ironing along that seam. That's it, nowhere else, because everywhere else is still pretty lumpy. All right, now I'm going to do the top edge, and I save the edge that has the opening for last. All right, so the edge that has the opening, you kind of want to tuck in those raw edges by pushing your fingers inside and then pulling along the material gently, nice and gently. This doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, this is the bottom edge in a lining pocket. So if it's not perfect, that's fine. But we do want to get it as straight as possible. And then just use your iron to press it down. So once you have your pocket pressed, take the top edge, and the top edge is the edge that is long and does not have the opening, and we're going to top stitch along the top edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take your pocket, and we're going to find the midpoints on the top and bottom edges. So grab an air erasing marker or a chalk marker, something that will not show up forever, and just fold this and mark your midpoints. Now grab your lining main panels, and if you haven't already, mark the midpoints on the top and bottom edges of each of these main panels. Now take one of your main lining panels and lay it right side up, and then grab your slip pocket and lay it right side up, and you're going to center your slip pocket and measure 4 inches down from the top edge. Now you can use pins here, especially if you're using quilt cotton. It's totally fine to use pins, or you can use tape, whatever's easiest for you, but you just want to make sure that this doesn't move around. All right, now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew along the sides and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch really well at the top corners here. Alright, once you have this top stitched on, use those 2 midpoint lines on the top and bottom of your slip pocket and draw a vertical line connecting them. So this is the center of your slip pocket. And what we want to do now is we want to top stitch over this. I find the best way to do this is to start at the bottom, top stitch an 1/8 of an inch to one side of the line, go up, and then go over the top of your pocket, and then go back down the line at an 1/8 of an inch top stitching. You want to have a lot of reinforcement on this middle pocket or else it will rip out. So starting at the bottom, going up, over, down is the best way to do it. All right, now let's work on the base. So for the base panel, my cork fabric here, I'm going to find the midpoints on the top and the bottom. And these are just the longer edges. I guess there is no top and bottom of the base, but the longer edges I'll find the midpoint on. Okay, on the back of my base panel, I used a chalk marking pen, and I marked 3/4 of an inch along each long edge. That's just going to help me make sure I properly center my firm stabilizer. And to help with this, I'm once again going to grab my sticky spray, and I just sprayed that on there, and then I'll take my firmer stabilizer, center it between all my marks, and stick it down. Okay, so on this part, we're going to actually be stitching from the bottom side, so your bobbin thread will show. So if you have some bobbin thread like red or something wild and you don't want that bobbin thread to show, then change your bobbin thread color. But for now, I'm good with the gray. So now I'm gonna go and I'm just gonna top stitch along all 4 edges of my bottom stabilizer at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you see I have a top stitch like this, and when you flip it over, you can see the bobbin thread on the bottom. This is the bottom of the bag. You're not gonna really notice, but it's there. So now if you wanna add purse feet to this, you can. You can add 4 or 5. I'll show you on my other bag, I did add the purse feet. So on this one here, I added 5 purse feet, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna measure in from your stabilizer. So 1 inch from each corner, so 1 inch over, 1 inch down from each corner of the stabilizer, not the main panel, the stabilizer. And then I also just centered another one right on the center of my stabilizer. And I think this looks beautiful. I would suggest a 5th one here because of how wide this is. The bottom will sag, so I would suggest a 5th one right in the center. So now grab one of your main panels and lay it right side up. And we're gonna be working on the bottom edge, so make sure your bottom edge has the midpoint marked. And then grab your base panel and lay your base panel right side down, so the right side's together, and then match up the midpoint on the base panel with the midpoint on the bottom of your main panel. Use some clips here and clip along this bottom edge. Okay, before we sew this, go along this bottom corner here, and on your base panel, measure in from the right edge 3/8 of an inch and mark a line. Because we're not gonna sew all the way to the corners. So do the same thing on the left side, 3/8 of an inch from the left edge. Okay, now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along this bottom edge here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but you're going to start and stop between these marks. Make sure you back stitch at each beginning and end. So once you have that stitched, grab some scissors and along the bottom edge here at that 3/8 of an inch mark, you might still have the line drawn there, you're going to snip into the seam allowance, but you're not gonna cut the stitching. You're just gonna go straight up, just like that, perpendicular to that long edge, and just make a little cut. I don't know if you can see, just right there. Do the same thing on the other side. Again, 3/8 of an inch in, so just follow that line you already marked, but don't cut your thread. So now take your base panel and flip it down so that the seam stays behind the base panel. I know it gets kind of bulky there, but we want the seam to be behind the base panel. And now on the base panel, along the right edge over here, mark very, very small 1/4 inch mark on both sides of your base panel, 1/4 inch mark. And now we're gonna top stitch along this base panel, and remember the seam is tucked behind the bottom base here. We're gonna top stitch at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting and stopping at those 1/4 inch marks on the left and the right. All right, this is how it should look now. So one side is attached. We're gonna repeat that with the other exterior panel. So take your other exterior panel and lay it right side up. Take your unit with the base and lay it so that the base is right side down, and match up the midpoint mark on the base panel with the midpoint mark on the remaining exterior panel and clip together. And just like before, measure in 3/8 of an inch from each shorter edge and mark a line so you know where to start and stop. And now let's sew along this bottom edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, once again starting and stopping at those marked lines and back stitch at each one of them. Now take your scissors and cut perpendicular to the long edge into the seam right at those 3/8 of an inch marks. Again, make sure you're not cutting your stitching, and then flip this open so the seam goes behind the base panel again. And then on the base panel along the short edges, just mark 1/4 of an inch from each short edge in, just a small little tick mark so you know where to start and stop. And we're gonna top stitch right along this edge on the base panel at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, make sure you're always tucking that bottom base panel underneath the base panel. The point of this is to catch the seam. All right, let's set this to the side for just a minute and let's work on the lining now. So grab one of your main lining panels and lay it right side up, and then grab your lining base panel and you're gonna lay it right side down, and just like we did on the exterior, we're gonna line up those midpoint marks and clip these together. On the lining though, we're gonna mark 1/2 of an inch from the short edges. So on the exterior we did 3/8 of an inch, here we're gonna do 1/2 of an inch, and we're gonna sew along this bottom edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end and start and stop at those marked lines. Once these are sewn together, just cut into the seam again, up along that 1/2 inch mark to meet your stitching, but don't cut it. And now I'm not gonna top stitch this. You can do just like we did before and top stitch along the bottom edge, and it gives it a nice look on the inside, but honestly, I don't really think it needs it, so I'm not going to. Now grab your remaining lining panel and make sure you do have the top going towards the top. So check your pocket real quick to make sure we're attaching the base to the bottom. Lay it right side up, and then take your base panel and lay it right side down, matching up the midpoint marks with the other lining panel, and clip together. And if you noticed earlier that my base panel was not centered on my other lining panel, no you didn't. I had to go fix that real quick. Just unpicked it and re-sewed it. So just make sure you always mark your midpoints on all your panels. All right, now mark 1/2 inch in from each side, and we're going to sew along this bottom panel at 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting and stopping at those marked lines, backstitch at the beginning and the end. And then grab your scissors and cut straight up into the seam at those 1/2 inch marks. And if you want to top stitch along the base panel, go ahead and top stitch. Like I said, I'm going to leave it. All right, let's put the lining to the side, and we're going to go back to the exterior. So take your exterior panels and make sure they're right sides together. The base is on the bottom, and let's clip along these sides. Just line these up and add some clips. Just make sure you clip both sides. So here's the thing. Per the pattern, you're supposed to sew along these sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But if you do that, you're going to see your basting stitches in the end, because the basting stitches were sewn on at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to say don't do that. I think that might be a mistake in the pattern, because if you look at the figure for this, the figure shows the stitching to go further in than the basting stitches. So I'm going to say we're going to sew this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance along the side edges here. And as you're doing that, if anything, just make sure you're going over the basting stitches or just a little bit in, like just a little bit to the left of the basting stitches so that you don't see those in the end. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Now, if you haven't already, which you should have, but I forgot, you want to have midpoints marked on the short edges of your base panel. If you didn't do that, that's okay. Just fold them in half now. Line up where they're sewn over here. Pinch and mark your midpoints. These are going to be helpful to box. So make sure you do this for both sides. And now let's box these bottoms. So take that seam on the side and spread it open with your fingers. And then line it up so that it comes together, the seam comes together with that midpoint mark on the base panel, and clip these together. So do this for both sides. All right, so now we're going to sew along these short edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. And then you can do another row of stitches at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's just to make sure that your stitches don't end up showing or ripping or anything like that once they get pressure put on them. Alright, you can put this to the side for just a moment while we do the lining. So take your lining panels and make sure that they are right sides together, and let's clip along the side edges. Now, take one side and measure 5 inches and make a mark on just one of the side edges. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this is what we're going to leave open and turn the bag out through in the end. So now here's the thing about sewing the lining side panels. The top edges here, where the very top of the bag, this seam allowance needs to be the same as the exterior. If this seam allowance is different, it's not going to fit with the exterior when we sew it together. So whatever you use for the exterior seam allowance, you have to use at the top here. So for example, for me, I used a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So up here, when I start sewing, I'm going to start at a 3/8 inch seam allowance and backstitch. However, as I go down the side, I'm going to increase the seam allowance to 1/2 inch. Having a bigger seam allowance for the lining allows the bag to just kind of fit neatly. It makes it so the lining isn't so baggy, but you can't start your seam allowance at the top with a big seam allowance, because then when you line it up with the exterior, it's not going to match up. So start at the top at 3/8 inch or whatever you used on the exterior. If you did use a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the exterior, then start up here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then as you go down, increase your seam allowance. Don't forget to leave an opening on one of the sides. Backstitch around the opening, backstitch at the top, and backstitch at the bottom. Once you have the sides sewn, now let's make sure we have the midpoint along the short edge of our base panel marked. So if you didn't already mark it, like me, then just fold it in half, and you can mark them now. Now, take your side seam and spread it open, and match it up with that midpoint on the base, and then just use some clips to hold these together. Okay, now let's go sew along these two short edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. on your lining, if you want, you can go ahead and trim down some of the seam allowance. Just make sure you don't trim the seam allowance down along the 5-inch opening here. Keep that the same. That'll make it easier to close it in the end after we turn the bag out. So I'm just going to trim down the seam allowance a little bit on the lining. Okay, now you can turn your lining right side out. Getting very cute. You can put the lining to the side. And then grab your exterior and turn your exterior right side out. How cute is this bag looking? I love this. It's so cute. I love these colors so much. Okay, now we're going to talk about the D-ring tabs that go on the side here. Again, this is completely optional. If you have the kit for this month, you saw that we do not have webbing. The D-ring tabs and the crossbody strap were all going to be optional and not included in the box. But since they did send you the hardware, I am going to show you how to make it all using as much material as we can from the box. So you're going to need your exterior and you're going to need your 2 cuts of whatever. So if you want to use webbing, you can use webbing. I'm going to use the cork that was in the box this month. Each of these are cut to 3 inches by 3 inches. And then I have my 2 D-rings, and each of these are 1.5 inch wide. Okay, so on the back of each of our little side tab cork pieces here, I marked a midpoint line, which is 1.5 inches up from either edge. And I'm going to grab some double-sided tape. I'm just going to cut a small piece of double-sided tape, and I'm going to put it right over that marked midpoint line on each of these. And then remove the paper and fold one of the long edges back, wrong sides together, to meet that midpoint line. And add it to the tape, or you can just use clips. You don't have to use tape. Do the same thing with the other side. So they both meet in the center on the back. All right, repeat this with the other tab connector. Now I'm going to take both these to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along all 4 edges of each one of these at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alright, once you have these prepped, grab a D-ring and insert the D-ring so that the straight edge of the D-ring goes against the back where the raw edges come together. And you're going to fold over one short edge of your tab so that it meets the center of the back. So if you want to mark this, you can. We can go ahead and just fold this in half and then make a little mark on the back so you know where the center is. Again, this is all on the back of the tab. So that way when you fold the short edge around the D-ring, it comes to meet that mark, and then the other short edge comes up to meet that as well. See how they both come like that, and then on the front it's nice and clean. Now, tape helps a lot here, so I'm going to grab some more double-sided tape, and I'm just going to insert that over the back, and then just tape down these short edges. And then I'll also use clips because the bulkier the material is, the harder this is to keep everything in place. There we go. So that's what you should have now. I'm going to repeat that with the other D-ring connector and D-ring. Once you have these prepped, flip them over so you're looking at the back side again and grab some more double-sided tape. I know, there's a lot of double-sided tape here. I'm always making a pretty small cut too to try to keep it out of the stitching. But you're going to add a piece of double-sided tape right over the back, just like that, covering both the raw edges. There we go. Now, grab your exterior panel, and we're going to be working on the top edge here. Measure down 1 inch from the top edge, centered on that seam, and just draw yourself a horizontal line. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your D-ring connector and you're going to line it up so it's centered on that seam, and the top edge of the material, not the top edge of the metal, but the top edge of the material lines up with that horizontal mark, and you can just tape this in place. So once you have that there, let's go take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch along all the edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I like to use a zipper foot here because I can get nice and close to that metal bar without touching it. If you want to do an X here, go ahead and do that as well. I'm going to be using rivets on this, but you want to really reinforce this because this bag is a big bag. It can hold a lot of stuff, and if you're using that crossbody strap, this is going to be pulling on the bag a lot. So anything you can do to reinforce this, do it. Okay, so you can see now we have our little connector here, and I like to add 2 rivets to this. This is why. 1 rivet, if I center it, it's going to go right through my seam, and I don't ever like cutting my seams. I don't know if it matters or not, but I really don't feel comfortable with poking a hole right through my stitching on my seam. So I'm going to do 2 rivets, 1 on each side of the seam. So I just measured about 1/2 of an inch up from the bottom, and then 1/2 of an inch in from each side and marked a couple dots. Then I'll grab my hole punch, and I will punch through all the layers. Then I'll grab 2 rivets and just pop a couple rivets into the side tab. And again, this is just to help reinforce the bag so that over time, while it's being used, it doesn't rip the material apart or rip the stitching apart. Here we go. And I'll grab my hole punch and just set these. And there we go. Like I said, it's completely optional. If you know you're never going to be using a crossbody strap on this, then you don't have to add this at all. However, even if you don't have webbing right now that you're planning on using with the bag, if you got the kit, this is a great little thing to add. You have all this. You have the cork. You have the hardware. You don't have the rivets, but you have the hardware for the bag. You can add it now and then eventually add a strap to it, or don't. You have a lot of options because it is a removable strap. So go ahead and repeat that with your other D-ring and connector on the other side of the seam. All right, so once you have both attached, this is what it should look like if you decided to attach them. So let's put this bag to the side for just a little bit while we prep the zipper. So make sure your zipper is at least 24 inches long, and I always like to melt down these frayed edges because they will just continue to fray over time, and we don't need any of that. Now, if you have a metal zipper end, which is always my favorite thing to do, you can add it to the closed end. So you see when you open the zipper, it opens over here on the left. When you close the zipper, it stays closed over here on the right. This is the closed end. I am going to just be sewing this little tab on the end instead of using a metal one. So we're going to fold back the edges of the zipper on the closed side, just like that. So fold it back. And then let's take this to the sewing machine and just stitch right over this little corner right here, just to hold back these folds so we're not wrestling with it when we attach the tab. Now, if you want to use tape here, you can, but you're going to take your little zipper tab piece here, fold it in half, short edges together, wrong sides together, and just insert it over that edge here. It doesn't look super professional. The metal edges look better, but it'll do. It'll hold it together, and it looks good enough. There are lots of different ways to do these zipper tabs. This is probably like the quickest way to do it, but it's just to cover the end of it. So now let's go top stitch along this at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along all 4 edges of the fold. All right, so the closed end is done. Now let's go to the open end and just open it up just like this. And what you want to do is just fold down, zipper wrong sides together along the outer edge here, so that the zipper teeth can curl up and away. Now you can fold down however far you want. So let's see, for me, I'm folding down about 1/2 of an inch, but if you decide you want to fold down 3/4 of an inch, that's fine too. Just make sure however much you fold it down, wherever you create this fold over here, you do it on the other side in the same spot. Now we can top stitch this in place. I always like to show this trick that I learned on Instagram, which is really cool. But you could also grab a lighter and melt down the edges of this and carefully kind of mush it together. And as these plastic threads melt, you can just melt them together. See, so it stays just like that. It's a pretty cool trick, but it is easy to burn yourself doing that. So be careful if you decide to go that route. Otherwise, just fold it over and then take it to the sewing machine and stitch down along the outer edges here to hold it in place. Okay, so now our zipper is all prepped and ready to be installed. So grab your exterior and lay it right side up. Now if you have a front panel, think about that. So let's start with the front panel facing forward. If you don't care, then don't worry about this. Let's fold the flaps down, the handles down. We don't want to worry about those right now. Now take your zipper, and I always like the zipper to close to the left. So if you have a front panel, then the zipper needs to be like this, so it closes towards the left. The tail over here goes towards the right. From the seam on the left, we're going to mark 1/4 of an inch in along the top edge. And I'm just going to use an air erasing marker to mark a line there. And then from the seam on the right, we're going to mark 1.5 inches in from the seam. And we're also going to mark 1/2 of an inch in from the seam. Now take your zipper and lay your zipper right side down along the right side top edge of your main panel. And we're going to line up the corner edge of our zipper tape on the open side with that 1/4 of an inch mark over here on the left, and use clips to clip this in place. You can open the zipper all the way, it makes it easier. We're just going to clip it along this entire top edge. We're just working on one side at a time, so don't worry about how you're going to do this on the other side just yet. Just focus on this. So as you move towards the right here, once you get to that 1.5 inch mark, your zipper tape needs to start veering down. So at this 1.5 inch mark, only then do you start slowly angling your zipper tape down, and by the time you get to the 1/2 inch mark over here, the zipper tape should no longer be in the seam. So that's the point of those 2 marks. This is when you start pushing the zipper tape down. This is when it should not be in the seam at all anymore. Okay, so we're gonna go sew this zipper down at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. And again, just pay attention to those marks and moving the zipper out of the way as you go. Okay, once you have this side sewn on, we gotta sew the other side on, but I want you to pay attention to how this should be. So my suggestion is slowly close the zipper. So twist this around so that you can close it just like that, okay? And now flip this over so we're looking at the other side. Pull down that handle, and now flip the zipper over. So you can open it up a little bit, and you wanna flip the zipper over like this so it's right side down against this edge. That's just gonna help you so you don't twist it so much. Because I mean, even this, it looks super twisty, but this is correct. If you just try to figure it out when it's open, it can be kind of a mess. So I'm just gonna clip this in place. So don't forget, this time over here on the right side, we wanna measure 1/4 inch from the seam, because this is gonna go with the open end of the zipper. And then from the left side, we're gonna measure 1.5 inches from the seam, mark a line, and then we're gonna measure 1/2 inch from that seam and mark another line. And let's open that zipper tape again and flip this around, lining up the zipper teeth with that 1/4 inch mark on the top edge there, and clip in place. And then just clip this zipper tape along the top long edge of your main panel. All right, once you have that clipped, this time I'm actually going to start sewing over here towards the tail. So I'm going to clip my zipper in place so that the first clip is right at that 1.5 inch mark. And I'm just gonna angle down my zipper tape. And I'm just gonna start sewing at that 1/2 inch mark, making sure the zipper tape's not in the seam. And then I'm just gonna keep sewing to keep the zipper tape into the seam at the 1.5 inch mark. And then again, just keep sewing along the top. I'm sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, now just before we move on, just double check. Close your zipper, okay? It should be straight. When you look at the top, it should be zipper teeth on top. Pull, just like that. No twisties, nothing wonky going on. All right, as long as that's good, we can move on. So now take your exterior and turn it wrong side out. Then grab your lining, and your lining should be right side out, and just insert that into the inside of the exterior so that they're right sides together. Make sure you take these handles and shove them in there. They should not be sticking out. So now I like to start with the seams on the side. So I'm going to grab the lining side seam and the exterior side seams and line those up. And grab your clips and clip together. So do both of the side seams first. Make sure you tuck in that zipper tail. And then once the side seams are clipped, I like to find my midpoints on my main panels and line those up and clip the midpoints together. And do this for both sides. Again, just making sure you're pushing those handles in and away from the seam. And then once you have those 4 points clipped, then just go around the entire top edge, adding clips to hold it all together. All right, once you have the entire top edge clipped, we're going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Carefully make sure you're always checking that those D-rings aren't coming up to the seam, that the zipper teeth aren't getting in the seam. Just go slow, but 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have it all sewn together, reach in and find that hole that you left on the side of the lining and pull the whole bag through that hole gently, especially since for me, I don't have any interfacing on my lining. My fabric's a little bit more delicate, so I need to be careful. But luckily none of this material is terribly thick, so we're good. Guys, this bag is gonna look so good. Alrighty, so now I'm going to push in the lining. I like to top stitch the top before closing the lining, just to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. So what I want to do now is go along this top edge where the zipper is, and we're just going to flatten it out. I like to use my fingers for this. If you want to use an iron, I feel like that's just going to be more work, but you can use an iron if you want. I'm just going to use my fingers and go around, and I'm adding clips around the zipper to help flatten out this seam real nice all the way around, because we do still want to top stitch this. We want to make sure we top stitch it neatly. Now as you do this, again, make sure you always push the handles out of the way. The handles are not going to be sewn to anything else, so keep them out of the way. Alright, once you have that top edge prepped, we're going to just top stitch along the entire top edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alright, the hardest parts are done. How fun is this bag? You know what this would be good for? This would be a good like overnight bag. This would be a good teacher's bag, because teachers have a lot of stuff, but I wouldn't put like a lot of really heavy things in it. But if you had like a bunch of like blankets and stuffies, or like, you know, softer, lighter weight things, if you just had to carry a lot of things like that, this would be a great bag for that. I love it. So now let's close up the lining. So pull out the side that has the hole, and then I like to just kind of pull on the seam to straighten it out, and I find that that just makes all of the raw edges tuck in on themselves. And then just grab some clips and clip along this edge to close it, and then let's just top stitch along this clipped opening at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once you're done, push the lining inside the bag and give it a press if you'd like. How sweet is this bag? All right, I do believe we're done with sewing for now. The rest of the stuff is going to be done with glue or with rivets. So the bag portion is done. Again, if you left off this, then you just have the handle, which is also a great option, but I'm going to set this to the side. All right, so let's make this strap. My webbing is about 50 inches long. You can make it anywhere between 48 to 56 inches, however long you like your straps. So I have 1.5 inch wide webbing, 2 1.5 inch wide swivel hooks, and 1 1.5 inch wide slider, and then I have 4 rivets. First things first with webbing, always grab a lighter, melt down the cut edges. There we go. Now I'm going to take my slider, I'm going to insert my webbing from the bottom up and then over that middle bar, and you can just fold it over once like this. Let's see how far this is. This is folded over about 1 inch, or you can fold it over a little bit more and double fold it so that the raw edge of your webbing is tucked in, which is usually what I like to do. And then I used a small ruler, and I measured 3/8 of an inch from this bottom folded edge, and then I measured 1/2 inch from the sides to mark placement for my rivets. Now there's lots of tools out there you can use to help with rivet placement. I'm kind of loosey-goosey with it. I'm not that precise, so whatever works for you. So I'm gonna remove one clip and pop out the holes from where my marks are, and then grab a rivet and insert it into the holes. So like I said, with this thick of webbing, I like to use 2 rivets. You probably could use just 1, but I like using 2. All right, so now take your webbing, so the folded edge is facing up. And while we're here, let's just go ahead and quickly set these 2 rivets. I'm just gonna use my little, this is not considered the hand tool, but I consider it the hand tool because I use my hands with it. So now take your webbing, so the folded edge is facing up. Keep your webbing nice and straight. Go to the other end. Take a swivel hook. Clip side goes down, straight bar side up. Thread it onto your webbing. Again, keep it all nice and straight. And then fold these together so you're bringing the opposite end up to where the fold over edge is. It goes up where that slider is, over the middle bar, and down the other end, just like this. So when you straighten it out, we have swivel hook, slider, raw edge. Take your remaining hook and make it so the hook is on the top now. And then fold over your webbing. And again, you can just single fold it or you can double fold it. So like this first fold over here is about 1/2 inch. And then fold it over again. And then I'm going to use the same measurements that I used before, about 3/8 of an inch up from this bottom fold and 1/2 inch in from each side. So once you have those marked and punched out, add your rivets here as well. And I love doing crossbody straps like this. I find that they're very durable. I would say they're more durable than if you sewed them. It's so much easier to add rivets than it is to sew. If you're new to bag making, getting a rivet press and using rivets can seem very intimidating. I have a whole video going over it. I will tell you, I do believe that any sort of rivet press, whether it's the big table one that you push down or even something like this, is just the best investment you can make as a bag maker, just to save time. And it looks professional, it looks neater, but it was so much easier to make. All right, our strap is all ready. I'm gonna go attach this to the bag and then we're gonna work on the tassel. Okay, so tassels are quick and easy and they just use scraps, which is why they're a great little addition. But if you're gonna do a tassel, it does directly attach to the zipper pull, so you wanna make sure your zipper pull has a hole on it, some sort of a circle. Okay, so on the back of your larger rectangle, on the shorter edge, you're gonna mark 1/2 inch down, and then you can draw lines if you want, or you can just kind of eyeball it. I'm just gonna eyeball it, and I'm going to cut strips from the bottom edge all the way up to that marked line. And they should be about 1/4 inch wide each. Mine are all kinds of different sizes, and they are wavy, and that's kind of how I like my tassels. They're not perfect. I'm not pretending they are. All right, so once you have the fringe all done and you have this little connector piece, grab your bag and let's find the zipper. And what you can do is just take this long strip here, thread it through the hole in the zipper and pull it down and line up the bottom edges. And then we're gonna focus up by the top of the zipper pull here. Just add a little bit of glue up at the top. So not along the whole strip, just right up there at the top like that. And smush it down so that it doesn't come unthreaded. There we go. And then take your fringe and lay it wrong side up. And what you want to do is you're going to take this and just wrap it around the piece that's already attached to the zipper, but we want to make sure we're gluing it while we do that. So let's get this over here. Add some glue along the top edge here where that 1/2 inch opening is. And then just find a good spot below the zipper and just start wrapping this around, keeping it as nice and tight as you can. Make sure your glue goes all the way to the end of your material. And then I like to grab a little clip here and just clip this in place and let the glue dry like that. And I found that the glue works great, that it doesn't come undone on its own, but I have said, some people say that they like to attach a rivet here. So if you have a small rivet, you can just rivet through all the layers. That would look really nice too. I'm just gonna use glue for now, but maybe once this dries, I'll give it a try. All right, and there you go. The tassel is so cute. The strap is so cute. It's all so cute. I will have a link down below where I got this webbing. There's lots of webbing colors and options. So that's kind of fun thing about this. You could do like a green webbing, you could do a brown webbing, the pink, you could do a cream. You could make a bunch of different straps for this. You could do a chain strap. It's so much fun. So you have the hardware you need, but the webbing is going to be something that your personal choice and you can find on your own. But yeah, I hope you guys love this bag. It's so cute. Thank you so much for watching today's tutorial. I hope that you are inspired to go make something and have a lot of fun with these patterns. If you're not already subscribed, please make sure you click subscribe down below. Also make sure you hit that little bell, the little notification bell. That's gonna make sure you're notified every single time we have a new video or when we go live. For even more fun content from OklaRoots, make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram. We do daily stories over there, which include unboxing, talks about books, other little mini tutorials, lots and lots of discussion over all kinds of things going on. You can also find us on TikTok and also on Reels for even more fun, kind of more random content. And if you really want to dive in for some behind the scenes content, free gifts, access to shop items before anybody else, and influence on upcoming videos, make sure you go check out OklaRoots over on Patreon. We have a lot going on over there and it's a fun place to hang out, and you are directly supporting the OklaRoots YouTube channel. These videos could not be possible without the help of my patrons. So thank you so much to everybody over there. Thank you again for watching today's tutorial. I hope you enjoy the videos. go make something.